This research demonstrates the dynamic interactional influence of sensation and emotion in the creation of memories and our responses to sensations from birth. Regions likely included are the amygdala, the anterior insula, the anterior cingulate cortex, the orbital frontal cortex, and many others. So when you think about arousal networks, the continuum between awake and asleep, you can think about arousal and the sensory systems going back and forth with one another throughout the brain and throughout the day, exchanging information, exchanging memories, comparing how the sensation felt to the body at first experience, and then how it feels now. Is it okay? Is it better? What do I think about this now? This transfer of information back and forth across the brain, comparing previous experiences to present experiences, begins encoding sensory experiences and can replace a negative association with a positive one. So think about memories as sensory fragments, because traumatic memories are stored in the amygdala with a sympathetic nervous system response, rather than being registered in the hippocampus and going up to higher brain centers to evaluate them as something to learn from. So part of our discussion needs to be thinking about this affective or emotional experience carried in limbic and paralimbic brain regions, and also other cortical sensory regions that we haven't thought about before outside of the sensory cortex in the brain. And neuronal activity separates different affect experiences along the lines of their sensory qualities, which is an interesting organization in terms of our memory structure and how we evaluate. So read that slide carefully, because it makes a difference in our work. So an emotional response is what this research is saying. An emotional response always accompanies sensory input, perhaps shaping the sensory response, and perhaps shaping the next sensory input that the child's able to receive. That's an important slide. And it's very important to consider this as we're dealing particularly with young children who are experiencing many of these sensations for the first time. Early sensory cortical areas are frequently engaged during sensory-driven affective inductions, which is why it's so important to keep our sensory integration, our sensory processing playful, kind, enjoyable, and more affect-laden for the child to really get involved in the therapeutic experience. Because the greater the affect-related activity, the more importance it's going to be in all of our sensory systems and all of our somatosensory inputs. And we know that this kind of organized activity is exactly what we're after, right? To help organize the brain. So this material is very important for us to reconsider. The question, is it sensory or it's behavior? What it's showing is it's always sensory and behavior. It's all about the relationship and the ability to plan, organize, and execute movements and emotional responses that are appropriate to the context. In the picture above, the 6-month-old boy is able to balance on his forearms, lift his head in space, stabilize his trunk, and makes sustained eye contact in order to provoke the positive response of smiling at his grandmother. Right after this picture was taken, he combat crawled over to her, was picked up and kissed, reinforcing his smile and reinforcing his need to see her smile back. Now we're going to talk about associative encoding. Look at this slide. Now, to me, that's really beautiful. I love being on water. I love a placid lake. I love mountains. I love sky. And the thoughts of this pier reaching into what looks like almost infinity is a really lovely, peaceful thought for me. There's a lot of involvement in sensory regions, not just the visual, when I look at this slide. And children who are developing typically process these positive affectual emotional sensations in a manner that's congruent with the situation, and then they retain positive memories about a salient or important experience. So think about a mom standing on the end of the pier holding her brand new baby in her arms. The mother says to the baby, who is tiny and doesn't understand what she's saying, but understands her vocal intonation and her relaxed stance. The mom says, "Isn't this soothing? What a relaxing picture this is." With her tone and the inflection of her voice, the mother conveys the affect of soothing and relaxing. The child then associates that with other times where this vocal input was associated with sensory input, indeed relaxing and soothing, like when he or she is being rocked to sleep. And then perhaps throughout the life of that child, whenever she or he has a visual input like this, or hears that same tonality, or feels that same affectual input, they'll have soothing and relaxing feelings. And during these safe, pleasurable feeling states, during this safe and pleasurable emotional security, young children develop a theory of mind. They develop the ability to understand and empathize with others. They feel what the other is feeling. The developmental milestones, then, of joint attention and shared engagement allow children to develop a coherent sense of self. It's the beginning of a coherent sense of self. And it allows the children the ability to meet environmental and societal demands associated with adaptive skills, with emotional engagement, with social reciprocity, with motor coordination of planning, organizing, and sequencing, or praxis. These developmental skills lead to organized language, cognition, as well as the motivation to explore, take risks, and seek others for safety and understanding. Over time, similar experiences become encoded, deeply learned, shape our choices, our occupations, our behaviors, and our responses to sensations, either modulating them, "Oh, they're safe, it's okay," even making them preferential. Negative associations, however, if we have a traumatic experience, can occur with a sensory experience also. And these are the babies who oftentimes come to us with defensiveness and avoidant behavior. The negative associations with previous experiences may lead to similar experiences becoming triggers for negative emotional states. May lead to similar experiences becoming triggers for negative emotional states. These negative associations, it can be due to developmental, genetic, congenital issues or to trauma, whether it be from environmental stressors or deliberate abuse. We've all seen preemies who are hypersensitive to certain types of tone. And the beep, beep, beep of a garbage truck backing up reminds them of the beep, beep, beep of the incubators in the preemie nursery. A gentle poke might remind them of a heel stick, a painful heel stick. And they over-respond to us to something that we're not thinking is going to threaten their survival. but as they interpret as a pain that's coming up. And these are the children that we see and need to then replace those painful experiences, those traumatic experiences, with positive experiences.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
You make a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Our takeaway moments seem to be that memories are sensory fragments. Think about that one. Memories are sensory fragments. They perhaps begin with a sensory impulse and a sensory stimulation and are encoded into our memory system in different ways throughout our brain. An emotional response accompanies and perhaps requires a sensory input. Brain activity shows that sensory input's a universal activity involving lots of different neuroanatomical structures, and really it has been present in the earliest stages of life, perhaps even in utero, in terms of basic physiological responses like the moral. During encoding or deep learning, the sensory input may come from an external source's affect in relation to the stimuli. So grandmother's smile can provoke this little boy to organize his body and organize his reactions to her in order to approach her. In an earlier course on sensory integration, you discussed this slide. Let's review it. The cerebellum, the premotor, and the motor areas, the parietal lobe and the prefrontal lobes, are all involved in sensory processing. This is really important to know about. Think of the prefrontal areas. In front of the frontal lobe and above the eyeballs, the prefrontal area is really important, handling sensory information, leading to motor organization, making choices, enacting judgments about how to move, and helping the rest of the brain organize movement. The motor functions linked to sensory experience. This is again from the previous courses. Motor functions linked to sensory experiences at all times. Sensory experiences really affect and are affected by the development of our reflexes, our postural control, our discriminatory responses to input, and our motor planning. The illustration shows you specific processes and pathways. It's very complex, isn't it? And I find it really interesting. Let's talk a little bit now about the societal emphasis on sensory development. Have you seen the film Babies? Watch it. Babies shows 4 typically developing babies throughout the first year of their lives, from birth to their first birthday. And it's just fascinating to see how babies raised in completely different cultures grow and develop in similar patterns, with particular milestones being achieved at different ages within a very typical range. The baby being raised in Africa has a little village around her and skin-to-skin contact all the time with family, relatives, and friends. She quickly learns to relate and interact by modeling those around her. She receives almost constant affection and attention. She lives in nature, and she's the first of the 4 babies to crawl, walk, dance, and sing. She learns to carry small objects on her head as soon as she shows balanced walking, and she's preparing herself for the adult occupation of carrying baskets on her head in order to contribute to her society. Our environment certainly does affect us, doesn't it? Think about our society. Think about a 1950s classroom. Sit still, listen, be quiet. Focused attention. Does this really make sense for how typical children learn, much less atypical children? How kids really learn? How do you think they really learn? They learn through moving, through touching, through mimicking, through shared attention, through an environmental surround that is full of organized sensation, an enriched environment. Let's think about typical 2-year-olds and baby brothers playing in an enriched environment of the home. Watch the YouTube video and watch their play. Note the differences in development and affect between the sister and her baby brother.
Kaylee, are you going to give Colin some tea? Hi, buddy. Hi. Hi, Bubba. Whoop.
No, you're gonna spill it. No, pulling like that. I know it's her.
Kaylee's doing Silly Colin. Okay, you show him how to drink your tea. Good job. Okay, give Colin a kiss. Give Colin a good kiss, Sissy. Oh, nice.